Hey folks, it's Chris Dyer with the Martial Alchemy channel here at Reborn Martial Arts in Springfield, Virginia. And today we are continuing on with our series on old school boxing. Today we'll be covering the British manly exercises from 1835 by Donald Walker. Let's check it out. Okay, so as always, we're in a new manual. Let's talk about some of the historic things that are going on around this time. I say around this time because this manual was written in various volumes covering about a 5-year period. So a couple things around this time period. 1833, so 2 years before this book was first published, British decided to abolish slavery, so a win for that. 1837, Queen Victoria ascended to the throne, so starting her long reign. In the U.S. in 1835 was the beginning of the Second Seminole War, and in 1836, Davy Crockett was killed at the Alamo. In France in 1835, the assassination attempt of King Louis Philippe. So a lot of really, really important and influential pieces of history, both in the old world and in America, are happening at this time period. Now let's take a look at some of the interesting things at the beginning of this book, and we'll get into some of the thoughts on boxing in just a second. Okay, so at the beginning of this intro, the author, Donald Walker, for the first time in a long time, we actually get a name of the person writing to this manual. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. So Daniel Walker describes this book saying that this is the first time that rowing and sailing are mentioned in a manual of this type. And he's also introducing riding and driving. Now, driving is coach driving, not cars. We're not there yet in history. But this is something that he says are unique sports to Europe. And this manual is actually really interesting. Even though we're specifically hyper-focused on boxing in this video series, this manual covers all kinds of things. In fact, later editions of his work, he focuses more on fencing and sword work, but in this manual, he does rowing, he does sailing, riding, walking, leaping, and all kinds of, basically it's like every sport you can possibly imagine is covered in this manual. And one thing that he mentions, and is kind of like the pride of his work, is that he has focused on attention to detail, that his intention was to be as thorough as possible in each subject matter, to either observe, participate, or get information from the highest sources possible. So we can immediately start making some assumptions about the author based on these notes. The first thing being that even though we finally get a name, so in our previous sources so far, boxing has either been something that the low class has done and hasn't been preserved in the historic record because they just didn't write it down, or something that the upper classes are doing as kind of a means of learning how to defend yourself, but I'm not putting my name to that thing because it's still considered low class. Now, because it's part of the sporting tradition, Donald Walker puts his name to it, proud to present boxing as a athletic thing. He also later on says that, boxing for athleticism, for getting your wind up, for preserving the lungs, for just being ready to defend yourself is an important skill, but he's not a fan of prize fighting. So we still know that this is someone who's kind of upper echelon, maybe upper middle class or higher tier in society. I couldn't actually get a whole lot of information from him personally, but we can make this assumption. He's upper tier, has the time and resources to commit to learning these sporting events, and he has the time to sit and write a manual on all of them. So we know probably well-to-do type of person. But again, not interested in prize fighting, probably doesn't compete, maybe has studied boxing, but we can just make the assumption now that the material that we're going to see in boxing from him is probably secondhand from someone else or reused material from stuff that we've already seen before. So let's take a look at some of the things that we actually get in the boxing section and see where we go from there. Okay, so now let's take a look at what they actually say about boxing in this section. So first, like all the other manuals, they make an appeal to the past. So the first thing that they say is that the ancients used boxing as a way of invigorating the public mind by creating in it a love of whatever is athletic, manly, and brave. So, like every manual at this time, we're appealing to the past. We say the ancients did it, so it's worthy of us studying it these days. This is really common for the time. Next, he makes the point that we've seen in other manuals that self-defense is essential, that man being a social being, we will eventually end up in conflict, and conflict will, at some level, eventually devolve into physical altercations. And so he says that by promoting boxing, are we more likely to devolve into that physical thing? Will it become boxing? If we get into an argument, will we just devolve straight into boxing? He says, is this a bad thing? And he makes some really, really interesting points that I think it's worth examining. I find this relevant even today. So the arguments that he makes is that A, it's a universal truth, people being a social thing, we're going to end up getting into conflict. If we do train in boxing, we're more likely to do that thing. If we don't, what's the repercussions? What happens if we don't? He makes the case that in those types of situations where a person doesn't study the manful art or the art of boxing, let's look at our close neighbors, the Irish or the Americans. He says that the Irish, their method of solving physical conflict devolves into boxing. As soon as someone gets down, you start curb stomping or kicking a person while they're down. That they have no sort of elegance or grace behind it. He goes into the Americans, known for their rough and tumble, hair pulling, eye gouging, and whatnot. And then he goes into a really, really in-depth sort of story about an American boxer. He came out of a match. His eye is hanging out of his socket. And one of the people said, hey, what's going on here? And he opens up his hand and he said, turns out I was a match for that ruffian or whatever. And he's holding the man's testicles in his hand, and he had castrated him in the match. Like, this is the type of thing that he's making the point that you're, if you don't have something to guide your physical altercation, it will devolve into barbarism, is what he says. And then lastly, he describes something a little bit more wholesome than that last tale, where he was walking past a schoolyard and he sees a number of kids, not like people circling around like you see today, everybody with their cameras out. He said it was he describes it more as a solemn affair sort of thing, that there were the two combatants in the center, a person who was kind of overseeing it, and then they each had their corner, and that these kids, they were getting into whatever reason they were having their fight. It was all very proper, is that they were going at each other, and then one of them would be downed or whatever, and their seconds would come in, they'd separate, they'd make sure their guy goes back to, they improvised seats, so they were going back to corners, they were getting toweled off in the face, then they were going back at it again, and it was all very structured, it was all very methodical. And this is the point that he's making, is that yes, if we train in the manly art, the art of boxing as a means of physical thing, will we devolve into doing that? Possibly, but does it beat the alternative of all the other barbarous things that we do? Young men getting their aggression out however they will, either through something that's systematic or through sheer chaos. And he makes the point that I think the artful way of doing things is probably better for society. And that not only is it training people for readiness in the military arts, the Army and the Navy he points to, but it's actually a way of getting out some of this sort of aggression in a systematic, trained, methodical way that can be overseen with rules and whatnot. So, this channel isn't about politics or anything like that, but I think that there's an interesting case that can be made there. Anyway, let's take a look at what he actually says about some of the boxing guards, and in our next video, we'll get into the depth of this manual. Okay, so that's covered a lot of the thought process behind why people should be doing boxing. Now let's cover into some detail about what we're looking at. So nothing out of the ordinary. We're just going to cover postures, guards, and whatnot today. And then in our next video, we'll go through some of the more detail. The thing that I love about this period and this time frame, lots and lots of pictures. It is extremely night and day difference between the early manuals where it's just kind of random descriptions and actual images of what people want. They're really detailed images. So this is really nice for us, trying to go back and look at this in historical context. So the guard, he describes the first one, nothing too out of the ordinary for us. So feet are forward, heels are in line. The hands are same thing as we've described before. Hand is going to be at chin height. Other hand is slightly below. We want about an arm, half the arm's length out. So if my arm's full extension is here, I bring it back halfway. The other one is protracted just a little bit. Left foot forward, which is going to put the left hand out a little bit more, and we're in this position. The next thing that we cover from here is from here, the left blow is what he calls it, so our jab. So he's extending the arm, and then we're stepping into this position. This would be called the long jab. And then you come back into position this direction. The cross, so you're driving off the back leg through here, and then return. So those are going to be the two big ones that we're going to cover. But the posture is the important thing. So he describes a forward lean, very much Mendoza-esque forward lean. Our back heel is up, and we're in this position. Now, what he describes is putting your body weight into every single strike, which is really, really interesting. It's less rotation and more body weight drive, body weight drive, body weight drive, which is something that I cover in my studio a lot. My students will know this, the idea of there's three ways of delivering power into a strike: with the body, with rotation, with body weight dropping. This is all about body weight going in. So we're here, stepping into this position, and then driving into this cross position. That we want the heel driving up on all of these. So I'm pressing off with this back leg. The heel will come up as I'm pressing forward, and then rotating into this, driving into that cross. The other hand comes back to guard position, and we're back here, facing the camera like so, driving straight forward with this. I want this long out. I'm doing my long jab, and then rotate through, and then back to position. Again, nothing too fancy here, nothing that we haven't covered. And then we'll, in our next video, start looking at the detailed explanations of what he gives for boxing. Anyway, let's get ready for more of this stuff. I'm glad you guys are loving it. Like, subscribe, share if you haven't already, and tell your friends about it. We're love doing this series, and I'm happy seeing you guys all liking, sharing, commenting, and whatnot. If you have any information, there's one thing I wanted to cover. If you have any information on who Donald Walker was, any sort of biographical information, put a comment below. I'd love to find out more. Anyway, thanks, and we'll see you next time, guys.